800 people woke up that morning. By noon, there wasn't enough left of them to bury. "800 Valyrians lived at the base of Velcarion, the howling flame. Shepherds, miners, and families with children who had never once seen the mountain do anything but smoke. They had no clue what was living inside. For 60 years, the volcano had been quiet, and in the old Valyrian texts, silence from Velcarion meant only one thing. We've talked about the White Colossus in previous videos. The god-born dragon, the Pale Doom, a creature with a wingspan of 1,650 feet that lived inside a volcano for 4 centuries. We covered the legend. Today, we're covering the nightmare. The single most terrifying event in dragon history. The night it woke up. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the ancient Valyrians didn't just fear the White Colossus. They structured their entire civilization around avoiding what happened to one village that forgot to be afraid. Here's what the half-burned scrolls tell us. Roughly 250 years into the White Colossus's lifespan, long before its decline, deep in the era when this god-born titan was at the absolute peak of its power, it entered one of its long dormancy cycles. The dragon would coil around Velcarion's magma chambers, half submerged in liquid stone, and sleep for decades at a time. 60 years of silence. 60 years where the mountain barely trembled, where steam vented softly, where the deep volcanic rumble that had terrorized the peninsula for 2 centuries faded to a low hum you could almost forget about. And that's exactly what they did. A settlement grew on Velcarion's southern slope. The scrolls call it Vale Thara. It started as a seasonal camp. Miners extracting obsidian and volcanic glass from cooling lava flows. The yields were extraordinary. Nowhere on the peninsula produced purer dragon glass. The veins ran deep, and the ground was warm, which meant the growing season lasted year-round. Within a generation, Vale Thara became permanent. Stone foundations, granaries, livestock pens, a temple to Therax, because of course, they built a temple to the goddess of the 14 flames at the base of her most dangerous creation. By the time the population reached 800, the oldest residents had never heard the mountain roar. Children were born and raised in Vale Thara who thought Velcarion was just a mountain. Just a warm hill that made the soil rich. Their grandparents knew better. Their grandparents had fled screaming from the Colossus's shadow when it hunted the valleys. But grandparents die, and warnings die with them. The mountain watchers noticed first. Every proto-Valyrian settlement within 50 miles of the 14 flames kept mountain watches, families whose only purpose was to observe volcanic behavior and relay warnings. These weren't scientists. They were survivors who had inherited survival instincts through bloodlines of loss. And the watch families, stationed on ridges overlooking Velcarion, started reporting anomalies 3 days before the waking. First, the mineral springs on the mountain's western face went dry overnight. Water that had flowed for decades simply stopped. Second, the ambient heat at Velcarion's base, which had held steady for 60 years, spiked. Not dramatically, just enough that the watchkeepers' measurement stones, flat obsidian discs laid on the ground to track temperature by how quickly they heated, turned too hot to touch by midday. Third, the birds left. Every nesting bird on Velcarion's flanks abandoned their roosts in a single afternoon. The air above the mountain went silent. No thermals, no circling hawks, nothing. The watchkeepers lit signal fires on the ridge. The old code. 3 fires in a row meant evacuate. Move your flocks, move your families, move now. Some shepherds in the outer valleys saw the signals and moved inland. They survived. Vale Thara saw the signals too. They debated. 800 people in a prosperous settlement do not simply abandon stone houses, full granaries, and 60 years of accumulated wealth because someone lit fires on a distant ridge. The elders argued. The miners protested. They had contracts, yields to deliver. Families had livestock that couldn't be moved in a single night. They decided to wait and see. That decision killed every single one of them. On the third night after the springs went dry, Velcarion split open. Not an eruption. The scrolls are specific about this. The mountain didn't erupt the way volcanoes erupt. There was no column of ash, no pyroclastic flow, no lava cascade. The southern face of the volcano cracked apart from inside, like something enormous pushed through solid rock, the way a fist punches through wet clay. And then came the sound. Survivors from distant settlements described it as a roar that started below hearing, a vibration in the chest, in the teeth, in the bones, before it climbed into audible range and became the loudest sound any living creature on the peninsula had ever heard. Watchkeepers 40 miles away were knocked off their feet. Livestock panicked and stampeded. Dogs went silent and refused to move. In Vale Thara, directly below, the sound alone killed. The pressure wave shattered eardrums. People staggered, bleeding from their noses and ears, unable to understand what was happening, because they had never imagined anything like this existed. Then the White Colossus emerged. 1,650 feet of bone-white scales, eyes like twin furnaces, wings that had been folded against a magma-hot body for 60 years, now stretching wide for the first time in a human lifetime. It didn't notice Vale Thara the way you or I would notice an anthill. It noticed it the way a predator notices movement near its nest. Here's what the surviving accounts piece together. And understand, these accounts come from watchers on distant ridges using crude telescopes made from volcanic glass, recording what they witnessed through smoke and firelight. The Colossus did not fly toward Vale Thara. It simply opened its jaws and breathed. The fire from the White Colossus was not like Balerian's black flame, not like the red-orange fire of the Targaryen dragons that we see in House of the Dragon. The scrolls describe it as white-blue at the center, so hot it was nearly invisible in daylight, visible only at night as a searing column of light that left after-images burned into the watcher's eyes for hours. One breath, a single sustained exhalation that swept across the settlement like a scythe across wheat. The stone foundations of Vale Thara didn't melt, they vaporized. The sand beneath them fused into glass. The obsidian mines that had made the settlement wealthy collapsed inward as the rock above them liquefied. The temple to Therax, the irony is almost unbearable, was the last structure standing for perhaps 3 seconds longer than the rest. Then it too was gone. The entire event, from the moment the mountain cracked to the moment the Colossus lifted into the sky, lasted 11 minutes. 800 people gone, not bodies left behind, not ruins to sift through. A smooth plain of fused volcanic glass where a village had stood that morning. So you might think this is a story about a dragon destroying a village. A tragedy, but a simple one. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong mountain. But that's not why the Valyrians remembered Vale Thara for thousands of years. They remembered it because the White Colossus didn't leave. After obliterating the settlement, the dragon circled back to Velcarion and landed on the now exposed southern face. It stayed there, perched on the broken mountainside, wings half spread, for 7 days. 7 days where no one could approach within 30 miles. 7 days where the ambient temperature around Velcarion rose so high that trees ignited spontaneously at the base of nearby hills. 7 days where the dragon simply sat, as though guarding the entrance to its home from anything that might dare to build there again. On the 8th day, it folded its wings, crawled back inside the volcano, and returned to sleep. It wouldn't emerge again for another 40 years. This is where the story becomes more than a horror story. This is where it becomes the foundation of a civilization. After Vale Thara, the Proto-Valyrian tribes codified something that had been informal knowledge into absolute, unbreakable law. The exclusion zones. Every volcano in the 14 Flames was given a boundary, a radius within which no permanent settlement could ever be built. The distances varied by mountain, by perceived danger, by which mountains housed dragons and which didn't. But Velcarion's exclusion zone was the largest by far. 50 miles in every direction. Nothing permanent. No stone foundations, no granaries, no temples, These exclusion laws became the first written codes of Proto-Valyrian society, before they had roads, before they had a freehold, before they had dragon lords. They had boundary markers around volcanoes, carved in obsidian, warning anyone who could read them, "Do not build here. The mountain remembers." And when the Valyrians eventually did tame dragons, centuries later, when the first rider bonded with a wild drake and the age of the dragon lords began, the architects of that new empire looked back at Vale Thara and understood something critical. You don't control creatures like this. You survive alongside them. You study their patterns. You respect their territories. And you never, ever mistake their silence for absence. Everything the Valyrian freehold became, the dragon-keeping system, the bonding rites, the careful husbandry of breeds and bloodlines, all of it was built on a lesson paid for in 800 lives and 11 minutes of white fire. Deep beneath the smoking sea where Valyria drowned, Velcarion still stands. Shattered, yes. Broken by the doom along with the rest of the 14 flames. But the bones of the White Colossus remain down there, fused into the bedrock, coiled around a magma chamber that hasn't cooled in 6,000 years. And if you believe what the old texts whisper, that divine fire doesn't die, that God-born things leave echoes in the stone, then something in that mountain still remembers what it did to the people who built too close. The Valyrians had a saying for Velcarion, one line carved on every boundary marker: the mountain does not warn twice.